Hello again. Today we're talking about the properties of multiplication. There are properties of multiplication that are always true. First is the commutative property of multiplication. The commutative property of multiplication says that the order of two factors in multiplication doesn't matter. So that means you can multiply in any order. I can do 4 times 3, and that is the same as 3 times 4. Or negative 2 times 5 is the same as 5 times negative 2. That also means that x times y is equal to y times x. Next is the associative property of multiplication. The associative property of multiplication says that the grouping of numbers in multiplication does not matter. So 3 times 4 times 5 is equal to 3 times 4 times 5. So the grouping symbols don't change the value. In the same way, x times y times z equals x times y times z. Remember that there are parentheses on both sides of the equal sign. Next, we're going to talk about the identity property of multiplication, and that says that the product of any number and 1 is that number. So you can multiply any number, like 52 times 1, and the answer is 52. Or 1 times negative 7 is negative 7. And this is the identity property of multiplication. And finally, we're going to talk about the zero property of multiplication. The zero property of multiplication says the product of 0 and any number is 0. So what that means is 0 times any number, like 4, is 0. Or negative 2 times 0 equals 0. And that's the zero property of multiplication. So let's say we have 2x times 4y equals 4y times 2x. Well, which property is this? Which property is multiplication where you switch the order that things are multiplied? Well, that would be the commutative property of multiplication because the order is switched. There are parentheses, but in the associative property, remember that everything stays in the same order. Notice here that the order has switched. How about negative 3 times 1 equals negative 3? All right, so which property says that if you multiply it by 1, the number stays the same? Well, that'll be the identity property. The identity property says that multiplying by 1 does not change the value of a number. All right, here I have a times b times c equals a times b times c, and I'm using grouping symbols, parentheses, on both sides. So the order does not change. I'm only using grouping symbols. So that means that this is the associative property of multiplication. If I have 0 times 9 equals 0, which property is this? Well, which property says if I multiply something by 0, I get 0? Well, that would be the zero property of multiplication. All right, here I have 5 times question mark equals 5. So I need to know, 1, what property is this? And 2, what is the question mark? Well, if I want to know what happens if I have 5 times something and it still equals 5, well, I know that the question mark equals 1 because 5 times 1 is 5. So what property says if I multiply by 1 that I get the same number? Well, that would be the identity property. All right, here I have 4x times 7y equals 7y times question mark. All right, so I need to know what property is this and what is the question mark? Well, I'm going to say that the question mark is 4x. All right, so what property says that I can multiply things in any order? I can just switch the order. Well, that property is the commutative property of multiplication. So I'll say commutative. And that's how you use properties of multiplication.